In the desolate expanse of the northern Ural Mountains, where wind howls like the breath of some ancient force and snow swallows even the boldest footprints, a mystery was carved into the ice in the winter of 1959. Beneath layers of frost, silence, and Soviet secrecy, the story of 9 lost hikers would become one of the most confounding tragedies of the 20th century. They were young, smart, and trained. Most were students or recent graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, namely Igor Dyatlov, age 23. He was the expedition leader. He was a radio engineering student at Ural Polytechnic Institute. Yuri Georgy Krivonaskenko, age 24. He has a fun-loving personality and also known for playing the mandolin on the trip. Rustam Slobodin, age 23. He was a graduate of UPI, and he's also known as resilient and physically fit. Zinaida Zina Kalmogorova, age 22. She was one of the 2 women in the hike group. She studied radio engineering. She is a very experienced hiker. Ludmila Dubinina, age 20. The second female of the hike group. She studied engineering and economics. She's well outspoken and strong-willed. Alexander Kolevatov, age 24. He studied nuclear physics. He is also thoughtful and meticulous. Yuri Doroshenko, age 21. He was known for strength and bravery. He also once fought off a bear with a geologist's hammer. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, age 23. He was very energetic and athletic, and he studied civil engineering. Semyon Alexander Zolotaryov, age 38. He was a last-minute addition to the hike group. He was a World War II veteran hiking instructor and the oldest by far in the group. These are all experienced hikers, and they were all ready to go on their next hike. Their plan was a challenging ski expedition across Mount Otorten, a remote peak whose name, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, ominously translates to "don't go there." But the group had no intention of superstition. In the cold, rational world of Soviet academia, science reigned, and danger could be calculated, managed, and overcome. On January 27, 1959, the hikers set out from Vizhai, the last settlement before the deep wilderness. Conditions were bitter: snowstorms, dropping temperatures, visibility reduced to nothing but the breath in front of them. One of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, age 21. He suffered from rheumatism and sciatica. He had to turn back due to joint pain on January 28, 1959, before the group entered the pass. Yudin was the only survivor. His early withdrawal spared him from the fate that befell the rest, and this secured his place as the lone survivor of an ordeal that would soon unravel in impossible directions. Days passed, then weeks. There was no word. Families grew anxious. The school attempted radio contact. Authorities hesitated, then mobilized. What began as a late return became a search and rescue mission, and soon after, a full-scale military operation. Helicopters, planes, local guides, and soldiers combing through an endless white canvas that offered no clues and no comfort. Then, on February 26th, nearly a month after the group was last heard from, the first sign was found. A shredded tent, half buried in snow, pitched on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, a mountain that means dead mountain in Mansi. Not Otorten, their intended destination. They were miles off course. The tent wasn't just collapsed. It was slashed open from the inside, as if in a panic. Inside, personal belongings were left behind. Clothing, cameras, diaries, food, boots. It looked as if the group had fled in the dead of night without dressing for the cold, cutting their way out instead of using the entrance. Downhill, about 1.5 kilometers away near the edge of the forest, 2 bodies were found beneath a large cedar tree. They wore only underwear and had burned hands, as if they had desperately tried to keep a fire alive. Nearby branches were broken high up, suggesting someone had climbed for a better vantage, or perhaps in terror. Further up the slope, 3 more bodies were discovered, spaced out in the snow between the tree and the tent. They were better dressed but showed no signs of fatal injury. Their positions suggested they had been trying to crawl back to the tent. At first, it was assumed hypothermia had claimed their lives, but even that explanation felt strained. Why would experienced hikers abandon shelter in a blizzard without shoes, jackets, or a reason? Why the silent urgency, the pattern of fear without visible threat? The search continued for 2 more months. In early May, the remaining 4 bodies were found in a ravine under 4 meters of snow. These bodies told a darker story. One victim's skull was crushed. 2 others had fractured ribs, injuries said to require a force comparable to a car crash. One had her tongue missing, another both eyes gone. Yet there were no visible external wounds, no evidence of combat, no signs of a predator. Their clothing showed traces of radiation, a detail never explained and quietly buried in reports. The forest, once thought to be indifferent and empty, now pulsed with unanswered questions. The official Soviet conclusion? A compelling natural force, but no one knew what that meant. And the silence that followed would only deepen the mystery. The Soviet Union was not a country known for transparency. And in 1959, with Cold War paranoia at its peak, mysteries were not meant to remain mysteries. They were to be sanitized, classified, or erased. The Dyatlov Pass case, however, would not go quietly. Once the bodies were recovered and the search operations concluded, the official investigation was abruptly closed. The report offered no conclusive cause of death, only vague language that hinted at some unknown force, something powerful, sudden, and inexplicable. For many, that only deepened suspicion. Photographs retrieved from the hikers' cameras added further questions. Their final photos showed nothing alarming, just snow-covered peaks, smiles around campfires, and the last moments of normalcy. But one photo, taken just before the disappearance, showed blurred lights streaking through the sky. It was grainy, poorly exposed, and open to interpretation, but it lit a fire in the public imagination. Speculation began almost immediately, spreading first through scientific circles, then the press, and finally underground conspiracy movements. What could drive 9 experienced hikers to flee into sub-zero temperatures, half naked, in a panic? Some pointed to natural explanations. A slab avalanche was one of the earliest theories. Snow breaking off above their tent, crushing it, triggering panic. But no avalanche debris was found, and the tent had not been buried. Others suggested infrasound, low-frequency winds passing over the mountain and creating vibrations that induce nausea, panic, or hallucinations. A psychological collapse caused by the landscape itself. Then some suggested foul play. The hikers had camped on a military testing route. What if they had stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see? A classified missile test? A chemical release? The radiation found on their clothes, though limited, supported this theory in some minds. The severe internal injuries, crushed ribs and skulls with no external trauma, were compared to shockwave effects from explosions. Eyewitness accounts began to trickle in. Locals from nearby villages reported seeing strange lights in the sky the night the hikers disappeared. Glowing orbs, flashing trails, silent explosions. If there had been a weapons test, it would explain the cover-up. But if there had been witnesses, why was nothing ever admitted? Then came the theory of the indigenous Mansi people. Some suspected a revenge killing, trespassing on sacred land. But the Mansi had no history of violence, and their cooperation with search teams was genuine and extensive. No signs of human attack were ever found. Other theories were more fantastical. UFO sightings had spiked in the Ural region during that winter. Alien encounters, secret labs, paranormal forces, the missing tongue, the removed eyes, radiation, felt less like a murder and more like an abduction. But the most chilling theories weren't the wild ones. They were the plausible ones. What if the group turned on each other? Hypothermia does strange things to the brain. One symptom, called paradoxical undressing, causes victims to feel overheated and strip off their clothes in the final stages. Some speculated a mental break. Fear-induced confusion, hallucinations, panic spreading like fire through the camp. But that didn't explain the tent being slashed open from the inside. It didn't explain the careful way some bodies were dressed in layers stolen from the others, suggesting some died first, and others tried to survive longer. It didn't explain the burns, the broken trees, or the massive trauma without external wounds. There was also the question of time. The order of deaths didn't follow a linear pattern. Some died immediately, others may have lasted hours, days even, alone in the cold, under a foreign sky. What did they see in those final hours? Soviet authorities released minimal documentation. Witness testimonies were withheld or redacted. The bodies were quickly buried, and the site sealed off. The families were warned not to ask questions. But the public never forgot. In the decades that followed, independent researchers, journalists, and amateur sleuths combed through the files. They re-interviewed locals, traced flight paths, compared weather models. Theories evolved. New suspects emerged. But each new idea, no matter how well-reasoned, seemed to fall apart under scrutiny. At its core, the Dyatlov mystery doesn't lack theories. It lacks answers. The terrain is still haunted by silence. Hikers who visit the site today report an unsettling stillness, a feeling of being watched. The place where the tent was found is now known simply as Dyatlov Pass. In 2019, 60 years after the incident, the Russian government reopened the investigation. But not to solve the case. Instead, they announced they would only consider natural causes. Months later, the new conclusion was released: a slab avalanche. Once again, the state had spoken. Once again, the public remained unconvinced. Because the Dyatlov Pass doesn't just hold a tragedy, it holds a contradiction. A storm of facts that don't align. A neat official story masking a jagged, splintered truth. Time passed, but the mystery of Dyatlov Pass refused to be buried. What began as a bizarre footnote in Soviet history gradually transformed into one of the most enduring unsolved cases of the 20th century. With the fall of the USSR in the 1990s, a wave of long classified documents became accessible. But the revelations were neither clean nor complete. Many files were missing. Others were heavily redacted. Some seemed deliberately altered. Names crossed out, dates changed, locations blurred. Yet, within the fragmented autopsy reports, one detail remained impossible to ignore. The trauma inflicted on several of the hikers was not consistent with any natural force. Lyudmila Dubinina's missing tongue and eyes, Zolotaryov's crushed chest, Thibaut Brignol's fractured skull. These injuries bore the signature of immense pressure, comparable to a car crash, but with no external wounds. No blood, no bruising, just silence. If this were an avalanche, it was unlike any other recorded. Modern forensic scientists re-examined the photographs, satellite data, weather reconstructions, avalanche models. While some accepted the slab avalanche theory, it couldn't explain why the tent was slashed from the inside. Why had the group split up? Why some fled barefoot while others were found with odd combinations of clothing? One man's foot wrapped in a woman's coat. One hiker's watch stopped hours after the others. What were they running from? That question became an obsession for documentarians, online sleuths, and even state scientists. Books, films, podcasts, and research papers emerged, all reaching in different directions. Some circled back to Soviet military testing, pointing to nearby parachute mines, known to detonate with concussive force. A test gone wrong, perhaps, or one witnessed by accident. In 2013, a Swedish-Russian expedition ventured to the pass with high-tech instruments. Their conclusion? A rare weather phenomenon called katabatic wind, capable of generating sudden, violent gusts that could cause panic. But even they admitted this alone couldn't explain the injuries. Others believed the hikers had encountered a secret experiment, or something more unnatural. Radiation traces found on clothing continued to baffle analysts. How did it get there? The group had no known exposure to radioactive materials. Unless one of them had unknowingly brought something contaminated. Unless they had crossed paths with something they weren't supposed to see. Or someone. Yet, for all the theories, the timeline remained jagged and strange. The last entries in Dyatlov's journal were routine. Friendly banter. Meal plans. Nothing sinister. The photographs showed a group in good spirits. There was no sign of distress, no mention of illness or fear. Then silence. Experts now agree the incident likely unfolded in under 30 minutes. The group, sleeping in their tent, was suddenly disturbed by a noise, a light, a pressure wave, or something psychological. They cut their way out, not bothering to unzip. They ran downhill in socks and underwear, splitting up as they descended. Some tried to return. Others froze in the forest. Some died quickly. Others survived long enough to attempt shelter. Then, nothing. Their cameras captured no last moments. Their journals ended abruptly. The wind buried their voices. The snow covered everything but questions. And for decades, those questions have echoed louder than any answer. In 2021, a group of Swiss researchers introduced advanced avalanche modeling, feeding the Dyatlov scenario into physics engines used by Pixar's animation software. Ironically, the same program that rendered falling snow in Frozen. Their findings lent some credibility to the slab avalanche theory, at least from a mathematical standpoint. But even they could not account for the delay between the supposed slab collapse and the hikers' decision to flee. Nor did they explain the distribution of bodies or the chaotic evidence trail. Science, too, was left grasping. Meanwhile, locals near the region speak of the pass in hushed tones. Some still believe the land itself is cursed. A place where compasses fail and reason disappears. A place where time splits and men vanish. And then there's the name, Dyatlov Pass. It was once known by its Monsey name, Kolit-Syakhl, Dead Mountain, but it was renamed in memory of Igor Dyatlov, the leader who never made it home. The tragedy has claimed more than hikers. Over the years, journalists investigating the case have died under mysterious circumstances. Files have been stolen, witnesses have gone silent, and still, the mystery looms, untouched by time, unbroken by fact. Because maybe Dyatlov Pass isn't meant to be solved. Maybe it's a scar in the mountains, a riddle carved by nature, government, and human error. Or maybe it's a warning, a reminder that even in the age of satellites and science, some places defy understanding. Some stories cannot be mapped. Some nights, cold, breathless, infinite, are never meant to be illuminated. In the end, what happened on that February night in 1959 may remain a frozen whisper, locked beneath layers of ice, bone, and secrecy. But for those who keep digging, who keep returning to the past, there's a haunting truth. Sometimes it's not the answer that matters. It's the silence it leaves behind. You've been watching Trace of Evil. Subscribe for more original deep dive documentaries into unsolved crimes, dark history, and mysteries that were never meant to be uncovered. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and never go alone into the dark.